In this unit, we're going to take a look at some of the early civilizations that we in the Western civilization area are looking to for some of the origins, like I said. In the first lecture, we talked about the Stone Age and the Neolithic Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Now we're going to be taking a closer look at some of the individual places and civilizations. They're going to give us a better sense of the ancestry that we've coming from, concepts of law, concepts of patriarchy or male domination. We're also going to take a look at some of the ideas of religion and architecture, as well as some other ideas revolving around what we're going to eventually call economic and social systems. So each one of the things we're going to talk about, each one of those things we're going to talk about in the context of individual civilizations. And once again, you're always referencing back into the textbooks you're looking at, and of course the test questions. First thing, one thing that's interesting, and we all know this, think about a modern-day map of America, all right? Think of a modern-day map of America. Look at the 48 lower states. How many people live near the ocean? 5%, 10%, 20%? Well, if you looked at a map, think of all the high population centers all along the coastline. I gotta say, people like to live near water. Let's just put it that way, all right? If you take a look at ancient civilization, it's not going to be any different. Water is life. And without water, you don't have much civilization. You don't have an opportunity to concentrate people. So as we're looking at the archaeological sites, as we're looking at the ability for us to understand previous civilizations, if they don't have access to fresh water, you're not going to have a civilization there. All right? It's a very basic building block. In the context of what we're going to talk about here today, take a look at the area that you're going to know as modern-day Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. There are two large rivers that come out of the mountains and they head and they empty into the Persian Gulf, and I'll show you a map in a moment. But the idea here is that with access to fresh water from the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, there can be an opportunity for civilizations to grow. And in the context of the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys, they come roaring out of the mountains, so to speak, and then they enter into a very long, flat plain that is in modern-day Iraq. Here is an access to fresh water, and here is the idea that you can have an opportunity to grow things. Remember, one of the hallmarks or one of the signs of civilization is the ability to move past being a nomad and creating a sedentary location, a place where you can grow your own food. Well, the Tigris and the Euphrates river valleys offer that opportunity. Large flat plains with suitable soil, excellent access to sun, and, of course, that idea that it's going to be a place for people to congregate. People are going to come to the water anyway. So when we're looking for early civilizations, there's what's called Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers. We are looking in this area for some of the origins of some of the first urban, large-scale civilizations that you'll be seeing and reading about. One of the first things that we're going to look at is what's called the civilization of the Sumerians, right? There are going to be many, many peoples mentioned in your textbooks who are going to be coming and going through this area, and it's going to be sometimes bewildering to keep track of all of them, but we will highlight just a couple so that you can take a look at this idea that, remember, one aspect of his civilization is, of course, accessing and understanding the technology and the things that people left behind, the evidence that we need to interpret. The second thing, though, about that whole process is if we can't find the evidence, of course, we can't make the conversation. But then the other thing to think about is that in this area of the world, there will be various peoples coming and going. They will conquer and reconquer each other, and in each of those processes of conquering each other, they are going to be exchanging ideas, technology, religious concepts, sense of everything from food and technology to fashion to religious ideas. So you're going to see many of these early civilizations are going to be they're going to be called cultural borrowing. They're going to be borrowing things back and forth from various cultures, language terms, religion, lots of things like that. So you'll see that there's not just one distinct entity. There will be an idea, the entity or ideas, say like the concept of polytheism or having a religion of multiple gods. You'll see that transferred oftentimes back and forth various civilizations. You'll sometimes see the names of those gods and goddesses recycled into a new language or a new cultural context. Those are things that historians refer to as cultural borrowing. They're a very key element in understanding how ideas and concepts get from one place to the next. The Sumerians are people who are going to be providing us with some of the ideas that we'll be seeing here in this construction here. Whoops, this construction here. This is an area of the world that is very flat, very hot, but with significant access to the Tigris and Euphrates River valleys. What has happened here is that many of these civilizations were able, in their early years, all right, to create a series of small cities and city-states. And many of them are very similar in the sense that they're using the same construction material, in this case, mud bricks, all right? You're seeing mud bricks. And then what historians are interested in, and this is a nice example for us, take a look at the large pyramid here in the back, or not a pyramid, but this temple complex or large building back here that's being constructed or had been years and years ago. This is some kind of a large-scale civilization. They have time, they have energy, they have the technology to create something greater and grander than the previous nomadic civilizations. This is interesting because now as historians, we would walk through this whole complex and try to understand how was this space used? What were the construction materials? How were they laid out? The complexities and the abilities for us as historians to understand the civilization are essentially going to be using this as if it was written document, and that we are trying to read it. We're trying to read into the construction, into the religious sensibilities. Are some of these aligned with the lunar or solar calendar? Are some of these buildings aligned with certain stars in the sky? We're going to find that information, we're going to use that information, and then we're going to have a better understanding of this civilization. The Sumerians will be creating some of these cities, and some of the more famous ones you'll hear and read about are places like Uruk. Okay? That is one of the ones you may be reading about in your text. There are other examples. They're going to give you maybe many different names. But the concept we're looking for is their ability to convert their space into effective use. And one of the key elements that's most important for these early civilizations is that the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers are relatively wild. They are, of course, untamed coming out of the mountains. There's not a series of dams and things like that that the modern world has created. These waters come rushing out of the mountains in response to melting snow and rainstorms. They're relatively unpredictable. So one thing that's been interesting as we've looked at some of the city-states in Mesopotamia that are relying on the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers is that there's a sense of unpredictability, that the river might be high one day, low the next. There's a sort of an unpredictability there, and when they linked that to their concepts of their gods and goddesses, they started to think that, well, the gods and goddesses are also kind of unpredictable, and that they will do what they wish when they wish. This kind of reinforcing idea is interesting, especially because, as we will see later on, there is a very intricate and very powerful series of irrigation canals on both of these rivers, where the people who are living next to these rivers rely on that fresh water for food production and, of course, for water to drink. But the key concept is if you start to see that this very complex irrigation system is well maintained, and within the law codes of some of these societies, you see that they are very carefully controlling who has access to water, and lots of laws about making sure you maintain your dikes and make sure that you carefully check your irrigation systems. You're going to have a reinforcing information there that there's a hierarchy controlling them. There are people who are specialized in controlling those areas, and you're going to think in terms of, okay, this society is more and more complex as we look at it. There's going to be the creation of various hierarchies. And also, we're going to see that those are very key ideas to understanding the law codes that we'll be thinking and reading about soon. All right. Also, we'll be taking a look at some other civilizations. And there's going to be several of them mentioned, but the Akkadians are going to be the ones that are very interesting. They're going to leave behind for us a significant number of written materials that are going to be very interpretive and very understanding of what was going on around them. They're also going to be providing us lots of information, for example, about their military technology, military tactics, their ideas of religion and faith and patriarchy, and their ability to go back and forth, up and down and around. Because in this Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, there are a series of small city-states that are very independent of each other. There's a trade network that appears to be created between them as well as with outside entities, either seaborne trade or long-distance land trade. This idea helps us understand that people are coming into contact with each other. And inevitably, sort of like every time you travel someplace, if you leave the country and go somewhere, you go and you start to examine how other people organize their infrastructure. You take a listen and you listen to the language, you listen to the music, you see the outlay of the city or the rural area you're in, you take a look at technology and your place and how you can fit in and navigate it. Well, imagine that several thousand years ago, people are learning from each other, understanding from each other, and interoperating on many different levels, including trade. What I'd like to then talk about next is we'll talk about the people in Babylon, or people called the Amorites. On this map, we're going to take a look here for a second at the idea that they're offering you a color coding here, right? This is a snapshot in time. Your own textbook may have various maps like this, but what you want to think about here is that this coming and going of various civilizations is going to help us understand the cultural borrowing aspects that go back and forth. The backbone of all these societies will be the Tigris and the Euphrates River valleys. It will be the agricultural production of those areas, and you need the ability to think about how you're going to use that information to understand the grander scheme of things. All right. One of the last things I want to point out to you in this unit is you can take a look at some areas that are the key for our next series of lectures. And that is to take a look at the developments of areas that are going to be called Babylon. It's a key city-state. We'll also be taking out some time and talking more specifically about the civilization in Egypt. Now, as you move forward, please make sure that you take a look at all of the reading materials that are in reference to this material, and you need to make sure, of course, to go back through and take a look at the practice questions.